The cost of living is out of control, and that is nowhere more evident than on the supermarket shelves. The scale and the speed at which prices are increasing is really astronomical, and there is no sign of it slowing down. In a few short years, the cost for families has increased by €3,000 a year. Grocery costs are now skyrocketing at 3 times the rate of inflation, and anyone doing their shopping will have noticed it. I'm sure you've noticed it yourself, Minister. Trips to the shop to pick up a few items are increasingly costly. You can now spend €50 on groceries and carry them out in your hands. That's how few items you can buy now with €50. These soaring prices are particularly difficult for parents trying to feed children, or for people like pensioners who are on fixed incomes, who are now cutting back on groceries just to make ends meet. Minister, this should not be coming as news to your government. We are not just relying on anecdotal evidence when we say prices are skyrocketing. We now have a mountain of data to back this up. As recently as yesterday, Bernardo's published a shocking report which found that 4 in 10 parents are skipping meals so their children have enough to eat. On Friday, the St Vincent de Paul revealed that nearly half of its calls this year were about a single issue, and that was grocery prices. And an ESRI study earlier this year found that more than 60% of people had cut back on groceries to save money. So, Minister, this isn't a niche issue or one that's only impacting on a small number of people. The scale of these increases means huge numbers of low and middle class families are finding things increasingly difficult. But, Minister, the fact is Ireland is a wealthy country, and people shouldn't have to struggle just to survive, but that really is what we're talking about here. The cost of simply existing in this country, putting a roof over your head, keeping the lights on, keeping food on your table. And more people are finding this completely unaffordable. They spend all of their time desperately trying to keep their heads above water, and every waking minute worrying about how they're going to pay the bills, scrimping and saving not for a family holiday or for a treat for their children, but just simply for the basic food. The negative impact this is having on people's well-being is enormous, because you'll understand, Minister, constantly treading and trying to keep your head above water, it is exhausting and it is draining. Any unforeseen expense, like the washing machine breaking or a car needing repair, can throw family budgets into absolute chaos. In fact, according to a recent credit union consumer sentiment survey, 15% of Irish consumers will be unable to cope with an additional expense, an unforeseen expense of €1,000. And to put that in context, Minister, that's exactly what the government are going to be looking for from parents for college fees this October. So, Minister, I don't know whether this government is out of touch or simply doesn't care, or whether you're just not bothered. I hope that's not the case, but I really cannot understand why you have not tried to tackle this issue. Maybe you can explain that, if not to me, then to anyone watching in who are struggling to feed their family. The last time the government said it would do anything was in 2023. Back then, the Minister of State with responsibility for retail, Neil Richmond, convened a supermarket summit, an emergency meeting of the retail forum. It sounded really good, it sounded strong, very positive. He talked tough at the time, and he said he was giving supermarkets 6 weeks to bring down the costs of groceries. But the reality was somewhat different. He turned up, he wagged his finger, and everyone went home. The supermarket summit was a complete capitulation by government. It was a talking shop, and unfortunately appeared to only be convened for optics that everybody quickly forgot about. Not only was this an abject failure, it just seemed like government could not be bothered to put pressure on, because there are solutions, there are things that can be done. At the time, the Social Democrats asked you to compel supermarket chains to reveal their profits, and you didn't do that, and that's why we're back again today calling on you to do it. Minister, the grocery market in Ireland is worth at least €8 billion a year. So why is there so little transparency about profits? Do you not find that odd or a little bit worrying? Many of us have long suspected that consumers in Ireland are being gouged by large supermarket chains who use their operations as a cash cow. However, without full transparency on profit levels, it is very difficult to prove this. It is also very difficult for the consumer regulator, the Competition and Consumer Protection Commission, to do anything than issue bland statements, because the reality is they have no teeth. They have no powers to properly investigate this issue and to get to the bottom of it. And that is why the news that it is to reopen its probe into the Irish grocery retail sector, that is why that news is so underwhelming. Because the last time it looked at this in 2023, when prices were rising by double-digit figures, it said there was nothing to see here. It found nothing. Since then, prices have continued to rise, but the government has refused to give the regulator more powers. So what makes anyone think now that this latest probe is going to be any different? After all, it is hard to do an investigation like this when the government has tied its hands behind its back. And that is why our motion today makes an important demand. Amend the Competition and Consumer Protection Act to grant the regulator the statutory authority to compel the disclosure of information when carrying out market studies. This is what happens in other countries like the UK, so why isn't it happening here? Minister, we also want you to act in another area. Not only is there a complete lack of transparency around supermarket profits, it is also completely unclear how much profit goes to producers, processors and retailers in that food chain. We urgently need clarity on the way in which margins are spread out, because as it stands, it appears that the lion's share of the profits often go to processors or big retailers. To achieve this, we want you to grant the agri-food regulator the powers it needs to compel the provision of necessary price and market information from relevant businesses in the agri-food supply chain. This isn't just something that Social Democrats want, it is also something that the food regulator wants. Its chair, Joe Healy, wrote to the Minister in September 24 asking you for these powers. He did that when its investigation into egg supply chain had to be scrapped when businesses in the sector refused to cooperate. Nearly a year later, the food regulator is still waiting for these powers. The government hasn't provided them. Minister, when the government talks about the crisis in grocery prices, you tend to do it in the past tense. You talk about rapid price increases, what happened when Russia invaded Ukraine, as if the crisis ended there. But what really is not acknowledged is that those prices never came down. And now grocery costs are skyrocketing again, while the government sits idly by and watches it happen. Have you paid the electricity bill, Minister? Will I just continue?
The sound is more important than the vision, I think, on this occasion. Yeah.
Part of the privilege of being in government is that you can intervene. You can change the law, you can empower regulators, and you can force supermarkets to publish their profits. The big question that you need to answer today is why you have done none of these things. And why are you acting like a cabinet of bystanders, narrating a problem instead of doing anything? I implore you to get your act together, support our motion and take immediate action. Thank you.